Rights. We have a guest, a treat for you all. A great friend, Dr. David Moskowitz. Dr. Moskowitz is an internist and a nephrologist in Hollywood, Florida. He received his medical degree from Harvard Medical School in the 80s and has been in practice for over 40 years. For those of you who may not be aware of what a nephrologist does, they diagnose, treat, and manage disease and complication affecting your kidneys. This may include kidney stones, chronic kidney disease, renal failure, and other disorders impacting the kidneys. He's very busy, so we're glad to have him on. He's also the founder and CEO of GENOMED Inc., a genomics company that's leading the field of preventative molecular medicine. Welcome, Dr. Moskowitz. We're very excited to have you on Renal Rights.
Thanks so much for having me.
So let's get into it. So tell us about yourself. Just a little about yourself. Where did you grow up? Why did you decide to go into medicine, specifically nephrology? And when you're not practicing, what are some of the other activities you're involved in?
Well, my grandmother told me I'd be a good doctor. I had no idea what I was going to do until she told me when I was 10 or 11 that I would make a good doctor. So I completely trusted my grandmother, and she set my direction from then on. So unlike a lot of my classmates, it was great to have a direction. So that's what kept me going through high school and college, although I probably partied a whole lot less than all my classmates did. And initially I was going to do academic medicine, teaching, patient care, and research. But what happened was in 1994, so about 7 years into my first job as an assistant professor in St. Louis, I worked out how to prevent 90% of kidney failure. And a couple of years later, worked out how to avoid dialysis in acute kidney failure. So in a couple of years, I had basically eliminated the need for my subspecialty of nephrology. The punishment was swift and severe, and I've basically been blacklisted from academics and from professional medicine ever since.
Wow, that goes right into our segue, because I had a chance to briefly review your research in the 90s on the H gene, and it was actually labeled a master disease gene. I thought that was very interesting. Can you tell us about this game-changing research and what you learned from it?
Well, Charles, you're extremely kind to even mention it. Nobody ever has. I thought it would be big news at the time. So there was a French group run by Pierre Corval that sequenced the ACE gene and found a polymorphism in it that was more common in West Africans, we found. And so 50% of West Africans have it, only a quarter of whites, and African Americans are halfway in between. About a third of African Americans have this deletion genotype. And what the French group had found was that you get 2 copies of the gene, one from your mother, one from your father. And the gene can either have the insertion in it, which slows down production of the protein, or it can have the deletion, or not have the insertion, in which case the protein is made very rapidly and you have double the amount of enzyme. And they had shown that if you're DD, deletion, you have 3-fold higher rates of heart attacks than if you're the other 2 types, II or ID. And all we did was look at that polymorphism at the St. Louis VA, about 11,000 patients, at a dialysis unit company that had 4,000 patients, and at St. Louis City, another 1,500 or so patients. And what we found was that 2/3 of diseases in whites were associated with the DD genotype. In other words, excess ACE activity. And maybe 40% of African American diseases were associated with DD. But that makes sense because the white population is much newer. It's only, 100,000 years old, whereas the African population is millions of years old and has found other ways to get these diseases.
That's very interesting that the African population is 50% of the African population have this gene. I'm not too sure you're aware, but I'm from a country called Liberia on the west coast of Africa.
Yep.
So once you all discovered this gene, how did it inform your therapeutics moving forward of treating such things as renal failure or even a heart attack?
So what I was looking for was the African gene, because people of African ancestry have 3 to 5 times more kidney failure than whites do. And so I was trying to find out what the difference was between whites and people of African descent. First, I looked at a sodium hydrogen exchanger. Then I looked at this ACE gene, and it turns out to be the African gene. This ACE, insertion deletion genotype, is the African gene. And I was supposed to be the control, but like 25% of other Caucasians, I turned out to be ACE-DD as well. So you and I are equivalent. We're probably both ACE-DD. Anyway, what it means is that by then people have been using ACE inhibitors for kidney disease for a decade already. This is the mid-90s. And so they either were using the wrong ACE inhibitor or they weren't using the right dose. And so I started experimenting with different ACE inhibitors. I tried some of the newer ones like ramipril, lisinopril, didn't make any difference. Then I used one that was easy to get, quinapril, which was on our formulary, but I goosed people. I went up on the dose 5 or 6 times higher than anybody else was using. And my first patient, his creatinine came down, which I'd been taught would never happen. So already by March of '94, I had my protocol.
That is interesting. So for our audience, how does the ACE inhibitor actually work?
So it turns out there are 2 active sites in this enzyme. This is a very complicated enzyme. And even though it was discovered in 1954, there's still lots more work to be done on it and still more Nobel Prizes to win from it. So the enzyme looks like it senses flow. It's a mechanosensor, and it also senses oxygen level. It's a redox sensor. It's activated by hypoxia. It's in the lungs most of all, and it's how the lungs work. So there's this thing called ventilation perfusion matching, where if there's no oxygen in a part of the lung, there's no blood fluid to it either. And the way that works is the hypoxia activates ACE, it makes angiotensin II, which causes vasoconstriction, shuts off blood flow. So it's important for all parts of the body. And in the kidney, ACE is in the area of the kidney that undergoes the most growth. So when you take, and that was my project, when you take out one kidney, the other one starts to grow within 5 minutes. And I was looking for the signal for that growth because I thought if I could find the renotropin, the signal, I could give it to people and they would make, they would grow their kidneys and stay off dialysis longer. But in fact, the renotropin is angiotensin II, the product of ACE. When you take out one kidney, the blood flow in the other kidney goes up by 10 or 15%. And that's enough to make more angiotensin 2. And angiotensin 2, if it doesn't lead to growth and leveling off, if it's a persistent signal for growth, it actually leads to a process called apoptosis, which is cell suicide. So the problem with the renotropin was I found it, but it turned into a death signal for the kidney. And that's actually what's causing chronic renal failure, this activation of ACE. And it turns out the only way to turn off ACE in the kidney is with quinapril, not with any other ACE inhibitor. And it requires a humongous dose, much higher than anybody else is using.
Is when you talk about the kidney goes into self-suicide, is that similar to what happens during dialysis? Because remember when I was on dialysis, one of the things they told me was, you know, because you're going through dialysis, your kidney eventually shrinks.
And it must be. You're absolutely right. Kidneys normally are about 14 centimeters, so maybe 6 or 7 inches. And when you start dialysis, they're around 8. But then when you go on dialysis, 8 centimeters, so 4 inches. And then when you, after you've been on dialysis, they shrink down to 6 centimeters, so 3 inches. They shrink even further. So what that suggests to me is that there may be still ongoing apoptosis and shrinkage, because that's all apoptosis is cell death without inflammation. It's a programmed cell event. And if angiotensin 2 is driving it, it's possible that giving dialysis patients high-dose ACE inhibitor, high-dose quinapril, while controlling their potassium, which is no easy feat. You have to lower the potassium in the bath to 0 or 2 milliequivalents per liter. You'd have to do it with a nephrologist who actually wanted to take people off dialysis. So far, I haven't met anybody like that. But it might actually be possible to get people off dialysis with high-dose quinapril.
How many people have you treated so far with this method?
Since '94, I've treated about 4,000 people.
Wow.
Nobody has died.
Wow.
And for the last 5 or 6 years, I've been using high-dose quinapril even for stage 5 patients who've been told they had to go on dialysis or they die. And so far, my longest patient is coming up on 3 years without having to start.
That's wonderful. How long have you been able to keep renal failure patient off dialysis for? Is your longest 3 years? Because I've read in some documents that you know, this method could probably keep someone off dialysis 5 to 10 years.
Well, if I get to them early enough, if I get to them by stage 3, you know, when their GFR is, you know, in the 50s or higher, I can actually raise their GFR. So they're going the wrong way. And they'll stay away from dialysis for the rest of their life.
I see.
So clearly getting to people early is the key. But delaying, you know, I'm impressed that 3 years work, you know, is good for stage 5 patients.
Yeah, 3 years means a lot. That means you could get on a kidney list and not have to go through dialysis and continue your life and prepare yourself, because that was one of my issues. It happened so fast that I didn't have time to prepare myself, and you know, dealing with everything from physical of being on dialysis to, you know, to mental issues and everything else around that. You had mentioned that Africans have a greater number of ACE, and then African Americans, and then whites, which that statement makes sense to me because when I was on dialysis, I saw a lot of African Americans and the population of African Americans were greater than whites on dialysis. And I thought that was an interesting phenomenon.
Very, and there's been disagreement over what causes it. And some people think it's just the stress of racism, lack of healthcare. But at the VA where I was in St. Louis, everybody was poor. You had to make less than 20 grand to qualify for healthcare at the St. Louis VA. And they were seen by the same doctors. But the clinic, the hypertension clinic, was 40% Black, but the dialysis unit was like 95% Black. And so clearly there was something biological going on.
Now, it does, did you ever discover, look into whether food and nutrition or age has something to do with the ACE inhibitor going haywire?
Well, protein in general is bad for the kidney. That's been known for a long, long time. And the only way to keep your BUN down, which is the blood urea nitrogen, or an index of how much urea you have in your blood, which correlates with seizures and coma and bad things that happen. And the only way to keep BUN down is by eating low protein diet. But diet per se doesn't stop kidney failure. Only the combination of low protein diet plus high dose quinapril plus Florinef to control potassium does the trick. Diet alone is not enough.